All right, guys, let's make some sourdough bread.
All right, so I've had a lot of cool stuff going on. Definitely have been making progress here at the bakery. Luckily, there's a brand new market at the Classic Car Museum in St. Augustine. That's every Sunday. It started April 27th, and I got to be a weekly vendor from the first one ever done. And I've done every single week besides one where I went to Chicago for my cousin's wedding. Um, it's been great. It started off fantastic. This is one of the big ones I prepped for where I went for $2,000 worth of bread. Um, I did that the first few weeks of this. First week, I think I sold $1,800 worth. And then it started to dwindle down 1,700, 1,500, 1,300. And then summer came along where I'm doing 500 to 700. And to, you know, supplement my income, I also was consulting for a local pizzeria called Uptown Pizza. Speaking of which, my brand is Uptown Artisan, and I think I might change my YouTube name to that, so don't be confused when you see that. That will be me. Anyway, I'm doing a lot of prep. I'm doing a lot of different things. That was my starter that was there from the week before. It's been in the fridge. It was matured before it went in the fridge. And it basically had time and just got really acidic. But it's perfect to replenish. So I'm making quite a bit of starter that will be used to make different levains for different doughs. I'm doing country dough, inclusion loaves, ciabatta, focaccia, rye bread, pastry, and a Japanese udane milk bread. For the Sunday market, I arrive at my bakery on Thursday night. I feed the starter, I make the udane, I make the rye soaker, and then I go to bed. And Friday morning, I will make the levains. I get a few hours to kill, maybe go to the gym, shower, clean up, whatever, before the first levain's ready to make country dough, then inclusion loaves, then ciabatta and focaccia, then rye, then the Japanese udane with pastry going around in the background. So this is me feeding my starter. I need quite a bit to make all the levains, so I probably fed it about 800 grams of flour, 800 grams of water. I guess this is me showing them clean up as I go. At least spray the dough off of whatever I use. Here I'm making the rye soaker, which is of the flour's weight, 70% of the water, with half of the total flour, which is going to be my rye. The other half will be whole wheat. I'm using poppy seeds and caraway seeds that I'm also putting in the soaker because seeds that are kind of just raw and thrown in the dough are, tough on the teeth, tough on the mouth. But when they soak with the rye flour, they become more tender. Some of the nutrients actually come out of them. It's almost like I partially germinated them. And it really just helps with the flavor of the dough. However, I did make this dough kind of wrong, and I do want to explain what I did wrong, and that is I added another 2.5 kilos of rye to the mix, which I should have known is not what I want to do because I want all of the rye flour to be in the soaker. When I did that wrong, I also had to add more salt and add more water to make it make sense because it should come out to 90% hydration, 2% salt. So this batch of rye wasn't perfect, and I didn't have any good footage of me making it right. So unfortunately, you get this, but I will tell you what I did wrong, and you'll still get the idea how to do it by the end. So this is 140% hydration, the soaker itself, aka 50% of the flour, 70% of the water, and all of the seeds that I use. It is a fantastic rye bread when done perfectly. It's slowed down now that it's summer, and I don't really sell as much rye, so I actually took it away from the repertoire. I took pastry away from the repertoire. But I'm glad I got some footage of all this so you could really see what it's like when it's nuts. Another Thursday night task that I do is I make the butter block, and to do so I'll take some butcher paper and I'll fold it to be 1 foot by 1 foot or 30 centimeters by 30 centimeters. The dough will be 2 feet by 1 feet. So basically you want half of the area for your butter block as your dough will be, and that makes it so you can fold it in right. I try to be pretty precise with these creases. It just helps later on in the process. I've probably had my butter out for 5 minutes at this point. And one thing I learned from Leo the baker, who's a fantastic guy in London, I believe, is just flour the top, flour the bottom of your butter. It makes it easier to kind of just smash with the rolling pin. And then I kind of place my somewhat flattened chunks on there, which makes making the butter block better. I did like super speed this up, and I think it's just like outside of a frame rate. This may be rendered and look better by the time it's on YouTube, but as I'm connotating this, it's not perfect. Yeah, this looks like a mix of Kerrygold and President butter. I was using President, and now I kind of like Kerrygold better. It's just got a higher fat content, it's more pliable. President has, in my opinion, the best flavor, but Kerrygold's really good too. And it just works out better for the lamination process. And it looks like I just missed doing it perfectly on the sheet, so I did put in another butcher underneath. Kind of start by just hitting it, and then I'll roll it into place. And one tip I learned that I didn't know at this point is that if you poke holes in the corners, it helps bring the dough out to them without kind of popping your little butcher paper balloon. But you can see when you fold it in, like it will fill out the spots and make more of a perfect square, or closer to it. I think I ripped it a little bit, so I went that way. And I mean, I'm not too OCD about this. I want to make great croissants, but I also have a lot of other things to do, so I did it as good as I could. And then I went into the fridge, and this honestly won't even be used till Saturday, and I could, if I want to, prep a bunch of these, but eventually I took pastry out of my repertoire. So another thing I do is make the Japanese udane, which is kind of a scald. And at this point in time, I didn't really do it properly. So I didn't have my water hot enough. I should have had it closer to boiling. And basically what you do is it's 100% hydration. It uses 10% of the flour in the recipe. And you want the mix to be 65 degrees Celsius. So what I do is I take my room temperature, or my flour temperature, which should be like, let's say it's 25 degrees Celsius. I'll want my water at 90 degrees Celsius, because 90 minus 25 is 65, and that will make the end product 65 degrees. And as you can see, this looks kind of like a batter, like no different than like a Polish or like 100% Autolyse, where when it's done properly, it actually becomes somewhat like translucent, a little more golden in color, and much stiffer of a consistency. So this is a good example of you doing it wrong. Once it comes time for this mix, I will have a picture of it done properly and what it looks like. I probably should have put it in here, but I didn't do that. And I'm not the best editor, so doing that, I would possibly mix. As I say that, I kind of realize how I could do it. But anyways, you'll see it when it comes time to mix it. Maybe I can get some more engagement that way. One thing I'm also doing is I'm going to cool a bunch of water. Yep.
Look at that.
I do cool water on Thursday, so that it's ready for mix day. Here's Friday morning. That starter has, almost overflowed, if not overflowed. And I'm starting by making my Liquid Levain, which is for my country and inclusion. And I'm not sure what I did in this. I could do the math. I did 25 kilos of flour, so that would be 5 kilos of liquid levain I made. The rest of the starter will be used for my other levains, which are my stiff levain and my rye and whole wheat levain. So one thing I like to do is kind of mix the starter into the water into like a cream, and that's a Danish dough whisk that I'm using, in case people ask. Great tool. It just helps incorporate things better than, spoon or spatula. And once I get that cream formed, I'll add my Levain flour, which again is basically 2 parts high gluten, 1 part whole wheat, and then a little bit of rye. That's the best way I can put it. That little bit of rye is probably a quarter of a part, if not less. So yeah, this is Liquid Levain, nice tan beige color. The Rye Levain gets more brown. But this is where a lot of the flavor in the dough actually comes from. The rye fermenting and the whole wheat fermenting gives a great flavor. I let it get about a 50% rye, so it's still on the way up. It's yeasty, but it's got like a nice yogurty flavor to it that'll kind of translate into the dough. And so Liquid Levain's done.
With my big scoop, I do two big scoops of high gluten. One big scoop of whole wheat. And one little scoop of rye. And I do make sure to get in there with my hand and actually mix them together, so I don't get one scoop that's all whole wheat and one scoop that's all rye.
That sounded like I just got up in the morning, which I did if I'm making Levains, and I probably had my Zyrtec kicking in, because if none of you guys know, I am allergic to flour, I'm allergic to wheat, so the beginning of a mixed day, I'll probably sneeze a little bit. So now I'm making the whole wheat and rye Levain, which is, I think I fed this 1 to 2 to 2, but the flour portion is half rye and half whole wheat. So there's no white flour added in for this. Very prominent with the rye and whole wheat in the mix. I must have thought this was a good idea to include this. I guess some of the busy work that goes down the middle of it all. I think I got a splash of water on my scooper and then got some flour on it, and that's how that happened. I do clean a lot with the scraper. Honestly, like if I have a big mess, I'll get most of it with the bench knife or scraper, and then I will wipe down the rest if need be. This blue bench knife is a total game changer. It's from GI Metal. They really make fantastic products. But yeah, again, I'm using my Danish dough whisk to mix my rye and whole wheat Levain. And you can see this gets much more of a brown hue to it. This is a very flavorful Levain. And for the rye dough, I do let it get more on the acidic side. So like the Liquid Levain, I said I let get to a 50% rise. This I will probably let double and maybe even start to fall, because rye flour does play well with a more acidic environment. Anyway, now we're moving on to the stiff Levain. When I do a sourdough biga, I basically just do high gluten flour in the mix. But when I do a stiff Levain, I do my Levain mix, the same thing I did for the Liquid Levain. There I am cleaning my jar, making sure it's all right. I basically don't want my lid to stick to it. And this is the point where my starter would go back in the fridge since I'm done making my Levains. And it's matured to the point where I can make Levains. So it'll just sit in the fridge all week, and then I'll basically repeat the process I did the night before. So I can see I have the zest of 10 lemons over there for 12 loaves. And my blueberries, so that's one thing I also try to prep out what I'm going to do inclusion wise. Yeah, for the stiff Levain, I try to make that kind of cream again before adding the flour. And I did shake and somewhat knead this together. Just to the point it made like a ball. Maybe there was a little bit of dry flour, but it was still like somewhat kneaded together. Lately, I've honestly just been shaking them all like they're a biga, and I've been getting like crazy good results, almost better if not. So it's one of those things I've heard, like, don't form the gluten, where a lot of people with stiff Levains do form the gluten. Better said, with biga, people say don't form the gluten, and with stiff Levains, people do. So sometimes I, take those rules, break them, and I just shake and not form gluten with the stiff Levain, and I've been getting fantastic results that way. I think it just helps not over mix in the future. It's kind of more readily available for the dough. And it does get the rest that somewhat Autolyse is at a stiff consistency. I accidentally slammed the space bar and stopped recording in case that got confusing. But yeah, here's the stiff Levain. I always try to make sure I use a container that has a lid that closes pretty tightly so that I do have the ability to shake it. It is 50% hydration, and a good formula for this is 2F minus 1 over 4 will tell you how much water to use. So an F is flour. So let's say I'm doing 1 to 2 of a ratio. If I want to find out the water to use, I would do 2 times 2 minus 1, which would be 3, divided by 4 makes 0.75 or 3/4. So my ratio would be 1 to 2 to 0.75. And to make it make sense again, let's say I did 1 to 1 for the flour. 2F minus 1 would be 2 times 1 would be 2. Minus 1 is 1. Divided by 4 would be 1 divided by 4, or 0.25. So that would be 1 to 1 to 0.25. But that's the kind of algebraic expression I found that does, or equation, will let you know how much flour to use. I have it just plugged into XL at this point. I have everything plugged in. So for instance, if I want to make 48 country loaves, I'll plug that in and it'll tell me how much flour I need. And it will tell me how much Levain I need. And it'll tell me how much starter I need to make that much Levain. And it'll add up all the Levains I do and tell me how much starter I need for all the Levains, for instance. And that really helps because I can keep the iPad around and do that. It did kind of screw me over with the rye because I made the soaker and I didn't even think that the flour was already in the soaker, which I've made the dough before, didn't make that mistake a few times. Of course, when I'm trying to record and be cool, I make the mistake. So yeah, here's me forming gluten. And one thing that I will say is an advantage when you do make a ball like this is you can more visually see the growth versus when you just kind of shake it up. My main cue I will use is actually the smell. So if I smell it start to get acidic, I know it's ready for the dough.
It's time to roll out the mixer.
Sometimes after a week, you'll get little specks in the mixer. Just make sure to wipe them off. So I think this was when I had the AC pointing right at me, and so whenever I scooped flour, it'd just fly into the air. So I learned to point away from me. And then what I end up doing that bites myself on the ass is then I will be like proofing dough behind me basically on the speed rack, and it'll be aimed over there. And then I'll be drying out that dough because I didn't want this to happen. So, gotta play with where the AC is aimed. But yeah, I got my rye and my whole wheat. In my country dough mix, it comes out to, there's 7.5% whole wheat and 5% rye. So 12.5% is a rye and whole wheat mix. Gives it a little more flavor and integrity, or identity is a better word, than kind of the classic tartine 10% whole wheat. I also do 80% hydration, 20% liquid levain, 2% salt. So it's all pretty standard for the most part. Maybe a little higher hydration than some, but I definitely see people go upwards of 85. And honestly, once I get more and more comfortable at 80, the point I get bored of it, I will go to 85. I just have seen some beautiful loaves at 85. They look extremely artisan. They open up beautifully. But for now, with everything else I got going on, I am kind of keeping it at 80 for now, which for some is very high, but for me, it's definitely doable. It's kind of challenging, but it's not too bad. Best way I can put it. And honestly, if you guys are ever doing it, the more you do it, you get used to it. And a wet dough is a wet dough. The more you do it too, like, you just know you need wet hands, wet scraper. Once you follow the basics, like a 70% hydration isn't much more difficult than a 90% hydration. However, for most people, I do recommend just going up about 1% at a time if increasing your hydration is something you want to do. It's not the most important thing in dough making. Definitely mastering fermentation is much more important than just getting more water in the dough. But it definitely can make for a better bread if you are comfortably able to do so, but don't try to be a superhero. If you have to make your country loaves at 60% hydration to get used to it, do it, Then go to 65 if that's too high, meet in the middle, Or get good at 65 and really determine yourself. But even better, go from 60 to 61, 61 to 62. And every batch, it won't take that many batches before you're at 80, and you'll feel like nothing really changed because you only went up 1% at a time. This is a second batch of country. No, this is the first batch of country, and I'm basically just starting the Autolyse. So I always Autolyse at 60% hydration. This is me pouring my Bassinage water or water B. So I always have a water A and a water B. My water A is for the Autolyse.
Nice.
Water B is for the Bassinage. So anytime in the meantime that I get, I will start to mise en place the next thing. I believe I'm getting pastry together on the side right now that I will use on the mini mixer that's over on the other
Kinda
side
go
of the bakery.
in there.
Kind of replenishing the cold water. Before it looks like.
I'm gonna hit these sides a little bit.
Yeah, these stand mixers are kind of notorious, especially when you're doing something low hydration, like 60%, trying to get Autolyse. There'll be flour kind of left on the outside. I mean, bread flour is pretty strong. Whole wheat flour is pretty strong, so it will take a little while to absorb it. It's sometimes better to just add some water, just a little bit. Nothing I really count towards the Bassinage. Just to make it so you don't have to mix another 5 minutes to grab the flour. You can mix another 1 or 2. I'm also trying to get the butter, I guess, ahead of time. I believe I pulled the butter out a little earlier. But when I mix the butter into the croissant dough, I don't want it super freezing cold because I want it to be able to mix well in the dough. And the softer it is, usually the easier it is. And I Autolyse, it really depends on the week, between 15 and 30 minutes. I went from 30 minutes down to about 20 for the most part, and I'm kind of, after evaluating all the loaves I've done at different times, I think I'm going to go back to 30 minutes. It seems to do pretty well. I never do anything like a full hour of Autolyse. That would make my mix stages last forever. But as you can see, I'm temping the dough right after I mix my Autolyse. I just want to monitor, like, I'm using this water out of the fridge, and I just want to make sure things are kind of consistent with the last time I did this. And it helps me get an idea for how long I'm going to be bulk fermenting the dough, because the higher temperature your final dough is, or your final dough temperature, the less percent rise you're going to want in the end. So if my dough is 80 degrees when it comes out, I'm probably going to want a 25-30% rise, where if it's like 65 degrees, I'd probably want 100% rise, or what's a doubling, or even more than that if it goes more than that. And if I'm 75 degrees, probably 50% rise, and so forth, so on. So yeah, let's see, 65 degrees, I'd want 100% rise. 70 degrees, I'd want a 75% rise. 75 degrees, I'd want a 50% rise. And 80 degrees, I'd want like a 25-30% rise. It also depends how many doughs you are going to turn into loaves. Like, I'm doing 96 total, I believe, including the rye. So for me to get through that, that's going to take me at least an hour just to pre-shape, and, you know, another hour to final shape. So probably want more 20 to 25% to account for that time. Where if I was just doing 1 or 2 loaves, I could kind of nail it on the head. If I wanted 30% rise, I'd just do a 30% rise, because I'm only pre-shaping 1 and final shaping 1 or 2, or a small amount. But when I'm doing, you know, as low as 48 up to 96, then things are a little different. Here it looks like I'm starting to mise en place the second batch of country, which is going to be for the inclusion. This first batch was 10 kilograms of flour. This second batch here will be 15, because I'm doing 3 inclusions. I'm doing blueberry lemon, espresso chocolate, and cinnamon raisin. And those have pretty much been my go-to. At first, I was going to try to do a different special every time. And then I realized, like, money-wise, that's kind of tough, because I can't really have anything in bulk if I change it up all the time. So I want to have, like, one, what I call the fresh special, or the fresh special. That's my blueberry lemon, fresh blueberries, fresh lemon zested. And then my other 2 specials are kind of things I can keep on hand, like espresso chocolate. I can keep chocolate chips, and I can keep espresso. It's pretty easy. I can keep raisins, and I can keep cinnamon, no problem. That's kind of what I'm going for. Here's me cleaning up as I go. I notice, like, if I make like a little happy accident like that, it's better just to sweep it up than to like walk over flour and get it everywhere, and then you got to sweep the whole kitchen. So I do deep clean and sweep it all, but still don't want to walk around with flour. Feels weird. I've had enough of that from pizzerias, you know, crazy Friday nights where you don't have time to do a spot sweep, and then you're walking around on a ton of cornmeal and flour. So I got that ready to go. I'm probably like kind of freaking out internally, like, what do I do next? This was a big one. I think I did like some of the most here with the bread, because I was doing baguettes for a while, and that's one thing I didn't do here that I do want to make a video about, that and doing the rye properly. So here it looks like I'm starting to mix my pastry dough. My pastry dough is pretty much 55% hydration in total. I think I do like 60% hydration plus 20% stiff leaven, and my stiff leaven's 50% hydration, so it brings it down. I'm going for about 55 total. Yeah, it looks like I'm doing all water in this one, where I've done it with milk. I think I like milk better, but water is still really good. So it's really up to you on that. The butter in the actual dough is about just under 17%, 16.7%, 10% sugar, 1% diastatic malt powder, 2% salt. That's basically the dough recipe. And then 50% of the weight in flour I use to laminate. Basically the butter I use to laminate, so that's extra butter. So in total there's 66.7% butter. So 2/3 of the flour you use will be your butter total for pastry dough. Sounds like a lot, but it's necessary, and it's really important to use really good unsalted butter. Most stores have Kerrygold. I recommend using that. President's a good second. But if you just use like generic everyday unsalted butter, it's not going to be pliable. It's not going to work well. And it's not going to taste good. So it's one of the sad truths I had to learn. Like, I mean, not really sad because everything I do, I try to use the best ingredients I can. I'm a firm believer. One of my, subscribers here actually used the term the best. I'm not in the business of saving money. I'm in the business of making money. That means paying for grande cheese, using the best of the best when you can. That's just how you get customers to come in. Like your food cost as a percent will be lower when
salt directly on the levain. So I'm just gonna sprinkle all my salt in. Try to
Sorry,
get it
I
all
needed to turn
over
the sound
dough.
down on the clip.
Beautiful. And I'm gonna do my first little bit of
use the best ingredients you
my
can.
water beet.
Get your sales up from having good food. Teach people how to make it right. Once you get your sales up, your food cost as a percent will be lower. So like for instance, if your food cost is at 35% and you're a 10 grand a week pizzeria, and you're buying, Baccio instead of Grande, for instance, or something like that, and you went from Baccio to Grande and people start coming in and you get to 15,000 in sales, you'll spend more dollars, but like your food costs will go down to 30%, and your labor will go down because when your sales go up, for instance, if you do double the sales, you need 1.5 times the people, pretty much, if that makes sense. So ultimately, like, you do actually save more money when you go to make more money. If you're just about cutting costs, you're just going to lose customers. Somebody's going to beat you. It's a competitive world out there. Like, one thing you can control is the ingredients you buy. It kind of gives you an edge. Like, you can make the best dough, best sauce, but if you buy the worst cheese, you didn't do yourself a justice. Maybe I'm philanthropic. Sorry, that was another clip. I had to turn the sound down, almost taking me off course what I was thinking. But yeah, so like the pizzeria I've been consulting, they were kind of cutting corners. The owners are a husband and wife, super nice people. Like, they've been nurses all their life. The husband, he has, quite a bit of military experience. But I've heard they haven't been getting a great rap. So I went in and, offered some services, and a lot of it was what to buy, but there's a lot of it was, little tricks of the trade that I know. Definitely gave them a new dough recipe. Basically, it's kind of my 2-2-2 dough. There's egg involved, and there's diastatic malt powder. But yeah, it came out to a really good New York pizza dough that they have. That's kind of the best in town now. Sauce recipe, I blew their mind when I just got them good tomatoes and mixed it with salt, and customers are saying how fresh it is, which blew my mind when I realized how good tomato and salt was. Everywhere I worked in the past, they like to throw a lot of like the not even real Parmesan, like the grated shit that comes in a bag. A ton of garlic, ton of oregano. Like, I'm not against those things, but when you really taste like just tomato and salt and realize how simple it could have been the whole time, it'll change your life. Like, it's the best pizza sauce in the game. The only thing I do occasionally is I will steep a stem of basil in there. And if you do ever use like real Parmigiano Reggiano off the wheel, or Pecorino Romano, or Grana Padano, take the rind from the outside and steep that in the sauce as well, and you can probably use a little less salt. That's better than throwing like real Parmesan in the actual sauce. But then you can't really feed a vegan that way, so you gotta count your losses. I don't put the Parmesan rind in, but I have before, and it is actually really good, and it's much better than using cheap stuff. And there's no point in grating what you have fresh, because the rind being steeped will give you all the flavor of the Parmesan that you need. Yeah, and consulting's been cool because there's a lot of customers I got to talk to that are from Jersey like me, and I was able to impress them with some pizza. There's people that have been that might have came 3 years ago and they love the improvement. Their sales have gone up. Nothing crazy. I didn't double their sales or anything like that, but they, a little background, a very prominent pizzeria was opening up right down the street from them, and that's right when I came in. And honestly, if I didn't come in, there's a huge possibility they could have went out of business. And I definitely stopped them from that, and I still increased their sales a little bit. They're doing about 10 grand a week, and coming up into the slow summer, they're still doing 10 to 11 or 12, where with this new pizzeria that did open up, I could see them go from 10 to 8 to 6 downhill. I've seen it before plenty of times. And we did rebrand. We did make a new menu. I taught them some stuff on dinner side. I'm no world-class chef, but I do know the Italian pizza menu pretty well. And a lot of recipes are my sauces and things like that I've used for pizzas. I've made a lot of vodka pizzas. I've made Florentine pizzas and Alfredo pizzas and all that. And it is more New York style than classic Italian, but it's not the fine dining vibe of this place. It is the New York pizzeria vibe. So I'm trying to keep that at heart, what a New Yorker would like. And honestly, a lot of dinners, I'm more of a fan of the New York kind of rendition of it, or New Jersey rendition. I do put cream in my Alfredo. I like that better than butter, Parmesan, pasta water, Anyway, enough of that, more into this. So you can see I got two mixes going at once. I'm trying to incorporate butter into the pastry dough, and I'm trying to finish the country dough, looks like. I'm cleaning as I go. One thing that helps with cleaning as your mixer as you go versus just mixing until it does it is I don't want to overmix. So if I help what I can by a simple scrape, I'm going to make progress. So here I'm looking for a window pane. Looks like it's almost there, but not quite. Breaking on me. So I'm just going to do 5 minutes speed 2, and it'll be perfect by then. So I'm actually not even incorporating butter at this point. I'm just making the base dough, because with pastry dough, you do want to add everything but the butter. And just make a dough that forms some gluten. You just don't want the fat to coat the proteins of the flour, basically. So I don't really even let it rest too long, sometimes 5-10 minutes. But I do want to make sure the flour and water make love before incorporating the fat or the butter. A cool little trick too is once it does come together and all the flour is incorporated, or all the water if you want to put it that way, adding the butter with the other dry ingredients, because for instance there's 10% sugar, that kind of helps bring the butter in sometimes when you add the sugar and the malt and the salt with the butter. So it's kind of preference, and that's kind of something I've done in the last few times I've done pastry before I kind of took a break for the summer. For portioning the bus tubs, I use this spray bottle that is half extra virgin olive oil and half water. And if I don't shake it, we'll just get water from the bottom of the spray bottle, which is a cool little thing. Or I can shake it and get a mix of the two. So it's actually a pretty cool, neat little baker trick. that I kind of wish I knew earlier. Also, I must say, I did a little pizza gig with rice flour, if you see my last short I made. And I'm not gonna lie, I think I like it better than cornmeal. I think I like it better than semolina. I think I like it better than semola. It's really good for getting a pizza into the oven. It makes sense. People use it for bread all the time. But it honestly probably gave me the least trouble of getting it off of the peel for a pretty, 70% hydration dough out in the Florida sun. And now we got a great window pane. I am very happy with that dough. I'm going to let that rest for about 10 minutes before I portion it into bus tubs, and I'm going to do the next step of my pastry dough. Try not to waste a single step because mix day could go till 3-4 in the morning with all the bread I'm making, if I don't take advantage of my time. So I will be almost done with this pastry dough, and then I will move on to ciabatta, and then to rye, and then to the Japanese udon. Here I am, kind of by hand breaking up some butter to just hopefully help it incorporate. This butter could have been even softer. Sometimes I try to just get the butter out to room temperature an hour, 2 hours before I make a mix. That way I can kind of just throw the whole butter block in there and it will disperse really well. This was still on the coldish side, so I broke it up by hand. Probably will need a little more help from the bench knife to scrape everything up, but should come out pretty well. So here's some getting on to the sides, and I just take it out, move it to the middle. And again, I mixed everything but the fat first so that the proteins of the flour wouldn't get coated by the fat. When you're only doing something that's, say, 2% fat, you can mix it as you would normally all at once. It's so minuscule it doesn't really matter. But once you go 5% or more, it's kind of just good practice to let the water make love to the flour, and then once that's kind of over with, then add your fat. Here's me taking a final dough temperature, and I just want to make sure the dough rests before I portion it. Once again, my final dough temperature will tell me how much bulk fermentation is necessary. So again, to recap, 65 Fahrenheit, you're looking at about 100% or more rise. 70 degrees Fahrenheit, you're looking about 75% rise. 75 Fahrenheit, you're looking at about 50% rise. And 80 Fahrenheit, you're looking for 25-30% rise. Going by that method, you're way less likely to over or underproof your dough. And this method assumes you have a pretty strong starter, and it's just kind of foolproof. A lot of recipes say just wait till it doubles in size, and sometimes by then, especially if your dough is a high temperature, you will overproof your dough. And like the tartine book, for instance, they'll say things like, hey, I use warm water and I only go for like a 25-30% rise. That's going to have a pretty high dough temp, so that's why he's only going for such a low percent rise. This bakery's right next to train tracks, so that's literally a train going by about 15 feet from me. But yeah, you can see this dough it's not like a goopy mess that's stuck to the mixer. It's actually coming off pretty clean. That's usually a sign of proper mixing. If it's like a soup, it needs more mix time and probably on a higher speed. Here I mark it. It might be hard to see, but I'm kind of marking in it looks like I marked a little high, but I'm looking for 25-30% rise. And I mark it before I kind of fix it, but after every mix, to increase the initial gluten development, I will give it a little kind of aggressive coil fold, almost slap and fold, It helps kind of smooth out the dough, you know, accentuate the top of the dough. And this step is pretty crucial. I don't know how the mixer isn't quite enough, but doing that does raise the integrity of the dough. Kind of goes from this to something just a little bit better. And the more you do in the beginning, the less you have to do throughout. So for instance, this will not require 4 folds. Like, I could probably get away with 1 or 2 because of how good the window pane was and because of this step here. And that helps because by the end of this, you'll probably see I have maybe 10 bust stubs. And if I had to do 4 folds, I'd have to just stop more what I'm doing. I need more space on the table. Just really helpful. Here is one of the kind of, not a horrible mistake I made, but I just picked like the smallest vessel for this dough, leaving no room for it to rise. So you'll see me put it in here, and then a couple scenes later, if not the next scene, you'll see me move it to a bigger vessel. But yeah, clear cylindrical containers are what you really want your dough to rise in. Doesn't have to be cylindrical, it could be rectangular, but somewhat straight walls so you can really like actually judge the volume increase. Where if you put in like a metal bowl, you have to really just eyeball it. And this should be all bread flour for the ciabatta mix, which I am now at, I think I might even put some high gluten. No. Or I did some rye for the ciabatta, but see what mix this actually is. Yeah, this is just the second country dough or inclusion loaf, because the ciabatta I just did bread flour. There was one time I added high gluten, so I got a little confused there. So this batch is going to be 15 kilograms of flour, and it's going to basically 5 kilograms going to go to one inclusion, 5 to another, and 5 to another. And dough weight, that's more like 6.7. No, it's 10 kilograms of dough per bus tub. And yeah, I'm using the wet Levain, so I know it's country related. And my country, at this point I may have went 75% hydration for the inclusion loaves, which I nixed that idea, and I'm just at 80, just like the rest of my country. I noticed things were just getting too dense at 75, and I like to open it up a little bit more. I may go up higher to 85 throughout time. 85 plus, 11, so it actually will be higher. And I could have went out of just this container straight into the mixer, but it's, safe to check, make sure I'm not adding twice as much as I need, which would throw my timing off. I'd much rather have to throw out some starter than screw up.
That might have been an unnecessary step, but at least I used the same one from before.
Basically exactly what I was saying. I would rather throw away some starter if worse came to worse than have overproof dough because I threw too much, or underproof because I didn't throw enough. Or have to wait forever because I didn't throw that much, or be rushed because I throw too much. Just getting the recipe right helps. My timing is based on the recipes. Making sure that water is nice and cold. So this is the start of my water B, and I'm not actually doing a bassinage right now. I'm just kind of hitting the outside so that flour that's on the outside will get absorbed without too much mixing.
So it's perfect is this will be ready right when I'm ready to do my folds. So do my folds and then finish this dough.
Croissant dough is done. I'm done with that mixer. Why not clean it up? So I'm mise en placing some salt, and I believe such a great view of the stainless table right here. Yeah, it looks like this is for this batch here because I got a big scoop. Yep. I think I'm doing 300 grams of salt, which is 2% of the 15 kilograms of flour I'm using. And yes, I leave myself a little bit of margin of error here. That was 301.5. At this point, I'm okay with it, especially when I was like testing recipes in the beginning more. I wanted to be
All right, so it's time for our first fold, and what I like to do is mark my folds as I go. So if it needs 4 folds, it'll get 4 folds, but I'm guessing 2 or 3 honestly with this. It's already domed instead of being flat, so that's a good sign.
And this would be considered a stretch and fold because I'm pulling out the side and dropping it over the middle basically, and doing that 4 times 90 degree increments. Usually for the first fold, or sometimes up to the first 3 if I'm doing 4 folds, I'll do a stretch and fold, but I make sure at least the last fold is a coil fold. One, because it's more gentle and easier on the dough, especially as it's fermenting. And 2, it's like it helps keep the top to be the top and you're establishing that. But it does a little more gluten development doing a stretch and fold than a coil fold, but coil folds still do a great job. So it's really up to you whether you want to be more gentle or more aggressive. And you should go by the feel of the dough, because as it moves on, it gets a little more delicate. So I usually do, just to make it simple, if I'm doing 4 folds, I'll do 2 stretch and folds and then 2 coil folds. But if I know I'm going to do less, like in this case, I'll probably do 1 stretch and fold, and then the rest will be coil folds. Folding in inclusions, I do just a little differently.
Let's clean up the sides where we can. It's gonna get a little messy anyway, so speed 1, we're just combining. Alright, now let's get that salt in there.
I'm adding the first like 1/4 of my water beer or Bassinage water, and this is kind of just to help the salt come into.
So it looks like it took that water in pretty nicely. Let's give it some more.
And I've been mixing 2.5 minutes speed 1 to kind of bring the water in, just to the point there's no pool of water, and then I'll up it to speed 2 and mix until there's basically a ribbon or a pumpkin effect going on again. And this kind of helps because I can set it to 2.5 minutes. This mixer will stop mixing when the timer goes off, so It lets me walk away, mise en place something, clean something up. If I need to take a break, go to the bathroom, whatever, I can do that instead of having to babysit each mix. I'm doing so many of them and giving them additional gluten development that I am able to do it in this method versus very gradually adding the water and babying it, which I'm kind of veering off from.
Looks like it's already captured that. That last little bit, splash in. And I'm gonna start mise en placing my rye. I need 2.5.
And this is exactly where I went wrong. I did not need this rye flour. It was already in the soaker. But I saw it on my iPad. I wasn't paying enough attention. I had too many other things going on. And I ended up adding fresh rye to the dough that needed soaked rye on top of the soaked rye that I had. So the bread didn't come out the best. I actually ended up giving it away. But another example of how I'm not perfect and I mess things up, but I can still explain how to do it right. And I probably will do a video on making this dough properly so you guys can get a better idea of it. So I guess I went with the rye and then went to ciabatta after. Also, recording is it's a little bit easier just doing all the baking without the recording because I have like other two batteries on the charger of the GoPro. It's just one extra thing is dealing with the GoPro. Just on something like this where I'm doing this much bread, doing it by myself, no assistant, no partner, no help. So I really hope you guys do like this video. I hope this video isn't a total flop. I know it's a long one. But I mean, I love showing you guys what I'm doing. I love the interest you guys show in what I'm doing. So I hope this is enjoyable. Also, anybody who might have a pizzeria or a bakery, I got this dolly from Uline. Yes, it was like $300, but totally crucial. Being able to move this mixer out of my way when I'm done with it is life-saving. And I could watch the batch of dough mix forever. I love spiral mixers. I'll never go back to a KitchenAid or Hobart ever if I have a pizzeria. Maybe I'll have a smaller Hobart and use the attachments to do things like grind meat and cheese. But other than that, I have no real purpose. To make dough, I think these spiral mixers are a total game changer. Nice. Me over here kind of staring. I think I might be ready to start portioning this out. I wanted to wait at least a few minutes. I like to let the dough rest somewhat. It's not the end of the world if you don't. And still looks fantastic. Sometimes I can tell by how good the dough is by how much I can get out, like by grabbing it at once. If I can get, 4 kilos of dough in one shot, it's a pretty good one. So putting a lid on there is probably not the best move because if I, overshoot this whole thing, I like to spread it between bus tubs. That's a lot easier when I don't put a lid on. And I also do have to, like, you know, do the last part of the initial gluten development too. So that means taking the lid back off again. Not the biggest deal, but like little things I learned in my workflow. I also probably could have like gave myself some more real estate on this table. But I mean, since this was filmed, I definitely have gotten much better. For instance, sooner or later you'll see me fold in the inclusions, and you'll see kind of the old way I used to do it. Definitely have a more efficient way, and I'll kind of explain that, like my cinnamon raisin, for instance, I'll put my raisins and then I'll sprinkle cinnamon, where now I weigh out an exact amount of cinnamon and I do 3 times the water with it, because that cinnamon will suck out the free water that's in the dough. Because I have had like 80% hydration cinnamon loaves, and same with the coffee espresso, just feels so much stiffer. But once I did make like a batter out of the cinnamon and like a batter out of the espresso, I've been getting much more like uniform doughs. Like all my inclusions will feel like my country dough, and that's what I'm going for. Looks like I'm setting a time for the folds here, and it looks like I'm about to mix that rye. So the idea is the same. I would have just put the whole wheat in, the other half of the flour, put this soaker in, put the rye and whole wheat leaven, combined it, add the salt, and then bassinage the rest of the water. But instead, I already had rye. I'm not sure if at this point I realized I shouldn't have put the rye in. It might have been when I was mixing. I forget when it was. But at some point I had to compensate by adding more water, adding more salt, you know, and I didn't have any more rye leaven, so I basically had to, like, you know, suck it up with the amount I had. So, and I was like looking at it, it got really stiff. I was wondering why. It's because I have, you know, 1.5 times the flour I'm supposed to have. And I think that's when I realized, oh shit, shouldn't have put the rye. Yep, this looks like about when I realized it, because I don't know if I realized the salt part, because I do remember adding salt during a fold. But yeah, this is why just like take an extra step to dummy yourself before you throw something in the bowl is not a bad idea. And I made this dough before and I still messed it up, so that's a great example. Just, you know, stupid mistakes. It still definitely ended up good. I've definitely made myself some morning toast with it, but when this is done the way I intend to do this, it's one of my favorite breads I make, if not my favorite. It's like one of the best breakfast toasts ever. And I know for a lot of people, like a rye country bread is not an easy thing to do, so being able to do it feels good when I do it right, but definitely feel kind of stupid when I do it wrong. Might be here when I realize I screwed up. I'm very curious as to when I realized I messed up. Yeah. And this is definitely, I think, first time I did quite this much bread, because this was over $2,000 worth, and I did right around $2,000 in the past. And I don't think I did rye before that. So this was something somewhat new to me. But yeah, I mean, rye bread is not as easy as just throwing rye in the mixer. You do need to soak it. I mean, that gets kind of the enzymes working, gets, you know, the gluten really forming, the little bit of gluten that it has, where when you do it fresh like this, like, you're not really doing much but kind of incorporating it. So I'm letting this kind of Autolyse. And here's a good example of a coil flip. folding over itself and makes a coil. Easy way to remember. It's my favorite kind of fold, to be honest.
That's
like
nice and purty.
So yeah, normally I would have had this pre-prepped already, the cinnamon and raisins. I would have had the raisins in the cinnamon mix too. Blueberry and lemon I kind of do separately because the lemon zest is like, it's easy to sprinkle. But yeah, basically the idea here, I'm not sure if I did it perfectly. In this form of folding and inclusions, you can kind of do one fold, add some inclusions. I think I forgot the lemon zest existed at this point. Another fold, more inclusions. Yep. Then it occurred to me I need lemon in the blueberry lemon. So it's all zest, kind of go all over the place. Do another fold, more zest, more blueberries. And if you do it this way, you can leave some on the last side you do, because then you can just do stretch and folds the next fold. But I don't think this will need a fold after, so I prefer to do coil. Cinnamon raisin. Believe it or not, that's not even that much cinnamon when it comes down to it. If there's anything I realized in doing this, now I got a good recipe, but at first, like, I'd be like, oh my god, all they're going to taste is cinnamon and I'm going to kill them. And then I'd eat a slice at the bakery when it comes out and I barely tasted cinnamon. So if you're making a cinnamon raisin loaf, just do more than you're supposed to. Also, another reason that I do it this way in the bakery versus you probably see people with inclusions, like in their shaping process, they add their inclusions. It's hard to do bulk like that. Like if I had to do, 12 loaves of this by individually adding inclusions as I go versus, I'm making a batch of 12 right here. It's a little easier. I also don't really mix it in the mixer because I don't like making a mess in my mixer or cross-contaminating my mixer. And I don't do it on like that first fold when I like in initial gluten development. I do it like on my first actual fold or second actual fold. I try to go for the first because the more folds after that, the more you'll like evenly disperse it throughout the dough. It's kind of like laminating in a way. But yeah, this is kind of what I found to be like the best way. And the reason I don't do it in the initial gluten development is not any real reason besides the fact that I want like a good kickstart of fermentation. And that definitely helps when you just wait one extra fold for it, basically. For the espresso chocolate. So again, instead of just doing this, sprinkling, adding, I am weighing it out for consistency and doing it ahead of time. It just really does make it like a lot easier, honestly. Also, my espresso chocolate loaf, it's more honestly like a chocolate loaf. I probably could add some cocoa powder to the recipe, But for now, it's just kind of Cafe Bustelo and chocolate chips. And again, I actually mix the Cafe Bustelo with 2 times that weight in water and do, what is it? It's probably about, it's like 1% of the dough's weight, not flour's weight, in espresso. It's about 10% in chocolate chips. And I use twice the amount of water as I do Cafe Bustelo, whereas cinnamon I use 3 times as much water. Just based on how much they absorb, I want this kind of ending same final consistency. You can see these bus stubs are starting to stack up. I'm basically racing to get all my mixes done so that I can start shaping right when they're done. And I already know, like, if I did this properly, the dough wouldn't be all crumbly and broken up like this. Like, it'll gain some integrity through bulk fermentation, but overall it would have been much better had I done this the way I intended to do this. Also, I might have got like the salt right and the water amount right, but for instance, like the seeds, now there's less seeds in it because there's more rye, so didn't get like its full caraway potential that it could have got. I must either sold these half off or gave them away. I forget exactly what I did. I also learned it's kind of like rye is not like a, I've never sold out of my rye. I've sold a few with good reviews. I've never sold out of it. It's kind of rare. It's like gluten-free. Like I get, 4 people that ask for gluten-free. First of all, I've spent a lot of my life studying gluten, so gluten-free is actually a challenge to me, so I'm going to try to make a good one and get back to you guys on that. But as of right now, I don't have anything great. I tried doing a rice loaf. It wasn't really fantastic. I did give away that for free. It was really good right out of the oven. I literally ate the whole thing, but it didn't like hold well, so. And I couldn't make a sourdough because I don't have a rice sourdough starter, so. Definitely need to do a little bit of work and, figure that out. Forget if I added that little bit of salt right now. I think I may have. If not, I was on the first fold. But yeah, I kind of want to make sure I get most of the seeds off here because I'm about to do ciabatta. And it's not like a crazy cross-contamination I'm super worried about, like a little bit of seeds. I do want whatever little rye and whole wheat is on the mixer that I didn't clean to get into that ciabatta dough, which will then clean the dough for the Japanese udane I have next, or clean the mixer for that. I had to order more bus tub lids after this. I had to use, you'll see, I used some plywood as a lid for a little bit until I shaped the first bit and could use that lid for that bus tub. It's kind of funny. And so, yeah, for the ciabatta, I actually do a fermentalize, so flour, water, and leaven, and then I add the salt and the bassinage after. And I do 20% stiff levain. For the Japanese udon, I do 10% stiff levain, actually. And one thing I do is I basically get it out of the mixer, give it an hour to give it like one fold, and then I throw it in the fridge until I'm done for the night, and I pull it out overnight. So it's been chilled, and since it's been chilled, it takes longer to kind of bulk ferment, because first it has to get to room temperature, and then it can bulk ferment. So it gives me time to go to sleep. Then in the morning, I can shape it, and it takes a long time to proof. So I pretty much proof it first, and by the time I'm ready to bake it, it's ready for me to bake it. So, and that's in the summer, so that means in the winter I'll have even more time on my hands. But yeah, I'd love to come back and kind of show you my adjustments by, at least fall, because the seasons will change, and I have a schedule, and schedule works right now in the summer, but I'll have to make some differences for that season. So the best way I look at it is I always have a dough recipe kind of for the summer, one for the winter, and one that's either for the spring or the fall, more moderate temperatures. Definitely something, whether you don't do it at your pizzeria already, you should. Now that recipe can change as little as just the water temperature, or you can use less yeast or sourdough starter. You could use more salt. More salt's a pretty extreme thing. I do like it. But yeah, ultimately, when making adjustments, you would change the water temperature and change the temperature as an ingredient. That's like your best number one way to go. After that, you got a few options. Like less water actually helps when it's hotter. Less of your leavening helps, or more salt. And change one thing at a time, starting with what changes the recipe. That's the best advice I can give. So here I'm just making sure that the bottom is not just like goop all on the bottom. It looks really good. I think I'm slightly above 60% for the Autolyse that I would like, and that's okay. I still see some Rye Flour, so I'm just kind of letting it finish. Break my Bassinage water into 4 parts. The first part goes with the salt, and then 3 parts after that. And that lets me do the kind of 2.5 minute speed 1, 2.5 minute speed 2. And sometimes when I get into the 3rd and 4th part of the Bassinage, I will do 5 minutes speed 1, 5 minutes speed 2. And that usually leads to less mixing time in the end, which is nice. But if I go the 2.5 minute route, got no window pane, it's getting 10 minutes speed 2. If it's got some window pane, it's getting 5 minutes speed 2. If it's absolutely perfect, I'll probably just do some more initial food development. So in this case, it looks like I did 1 stretch and fold, and I'm going to do 2 roll folds. Lots of folds, lots to keep up with, so that's why I make the bus subs that I can. So, and the black bus subs kind of go with the white ones, so no color coordination. Like I know this is the main one for the country, so the black one that goes with it will also be country, if that makes sense. Now it's time to fold some inclusions. Because I left the layer on top, I'm going to do a stretch and fold. And that's pretty evenly dispersed. Same idea here. It is not fun having like a giant mass of cinnamon in your loaf or dough. And when you're doing this, or any kind of stretch and fold, or pretty much anything that has to do with dough, your goal is basically to stretch it to its like final point of resistance before it breaks. Like that's how you really build like strength in your dough. Once you break it, it's not that you screwed it up, but you kind of broke your nice rubber band you're working on, if that makes sense. So here I must at least have realized, and I think I just wet my hands to kind of get the salt in there. And you can see this still is kind of crumbly, where it would be like a nice fold if I was to do this right. Yeah, it still came out pretty good, but it just wasn't as good as I liked it. But rye has some different characteristics. Like, it is kind of stickier than wheat flour. If you might be really, really comfortable with wheat flour, once you make a rye bread, you'll realize the like physical differences. There is a little bit of unlearning to do when it comes to that. So yeah, this ciabatta I am going for 90% hydration. All right, so I'm mixing my ciabatta again, and it's coming to the end of the mix. So the next thing I'm going to do is give it a nice little window pane and just see where I'm at gluten-wise. I want like 90% of a window pane, if that makes sense. And what a window pane is just grabbing some of the dough, kind of stretching it out. Like, what you really want to do is grab like a baseball size of dough and stretch it with your hands as thin as you can get it. And if it can stretch to be translucent and you can see light through it without it breaking, that's 100% window pane. I like to get it to like 90%, where I get it almost to translucency and it breaks a little bit there. I know it's easy enough to get out of the mixer at that point. And I also know I'm going to be continuing to build strength in the dough as I go. So right now I'm mise en placing the udane, which I give it about 60% milk, 30% water. I think this particular instance I was playing with that amount because I know I added some water here. And the 30% water I usually add solely in the Bassinage. So adding water here, I must have been playing with it. But yeah, so this ciabatta mix is finishing up. I think I measure this and then I check kind of the window pane on where I'm at with the ciabatta dough. And I actually call it ciabatta dough because it's for both ciabatta and focaccia. I usually I try to get it strong enough to where it only needs like 2, max 3 folds. I'm trying to do that with all of the dough because, folding 6 bus tubs of dough in the middle of something else can be kind of annoying. So if I can do 3 folds 40 minutes apart, I'm happy. Or do 2 folds 45 minutes apart, or an hour apart even, I'm genuinely able to get more done. And in an instance like this where I did more bread than I usually do, I basically really just want to mix everything, get it all the folds that it needs, because the next thing I'm going to do is shape dough, like almost immediately after. That's when my original country will be ready. And I pretty much got it to work out like that regardless. Now that I'm doing less bread, I actually managed to get some downtime. I usually make myself something to eat, something like that. This was too much. This would only, if I had this kind of demand to do this every week, I would definitely do it, and maybe like 1 pizza gig a week. But the demand's just not that high. I don't have anybody hired yet. It would be a lot of work. But having like an assistant to come kind of learn what I'm doing and, clean up as I go would definitely help a lot. And that's how I learned, I was always in the background kind of learning as much as I could while doing more grunt work. And I am kind of a firm believer of that. I don't mean that in any kind of like degrading way. I think if you just give somebody like a really great position right off the rip, sometimes they'll take it for granted. can't really see it, but that was me giving it a window pane. And I just mixed it for 5 minutes. I think I said, you know what, let's give it 5 more. And this is a 1 bus tub thing. So realistically, I don't even need to weigh it because I already know what I'm going to get myself into. But yeah, I give the whole mass of dough about 2 folds, and then I will shape these into ciabattas. Focaccias, and I'll get 12 of them at about 340 grams a piece. And the rest of the dough, this is using 5 kilograms of flour, will make 16 ciabatta, which I kind of just, eyeball it, cut it into 16, and go from there. So that was a nice little dough dump, kind of showing how easy it comes off the bowl. Yeah, getting initial strength, that's something I've been doing more of, where at first I was kind of just combining everything, and it would call for more folds, and it would really just make a horrible mess in the mixer. So yeah, I'll get it 2 folds, I'll shape those focaccias, and then the rest of the dough, I will give it a very gentle coil fold at the end of bulk fermentation, which is kind of pre-shaping the whole mass of dough for that ciabatta that will be kind of eyeballed and cut. Now I'm starting to mix the udane, and here I grab my stiff starter, and I'm using the rest of it, which is about 500 grams or 10% of the flour's weight. And I don't use 20% because what I do with this dough is once it gets its 1 fold an hour in, it'll go in the fridge for about 4 hours to completely cool down. And at the end of the night before I go to sleep, I will just pull it out, leave it on the counter. In the morning, it's like beautiful and ready to shape. Here's the udane that I did, and it's not the right kind of consistency. This is more what you're looking for, something thick, almost coming up on translucent, and this is what happens when you get the temperature right. What you're looking at right now is when you get the temperature wrong. All I really did was kind of Autolyse 100 or 10% of my flour at 100% hydration. Where on that picture you saw it look much stiffer, like chunks. And that's how you can get more water into your dough without it feeling that way. So like if I did 20% of my dough, like a whole kilo of flour, at 100% hydration, scalding it, it would feel stiffer overall. So it's kind of a cool way to, get more out of your dough. More water, and it's kind of just more digestible. And you're eliminating some of the ability to form gluten immediately. So this was a learning experience. Annoying timers are key.
That means I'm due for folds once I get a nice pause. So this is all my dry. I'm just gonna mix it all together like that. And I still have, there we go, a little bit of my milk for later.
When I mix my udane, I usually leave out the dry ingredients nowadays, and I'll have a stick of butter that's like completely room temperature and softened. When I add that in, I'll add the dry so that the dry and the butter kind of mix. here's me folding the rye, and you can see it's kind of breaking apart as I do it, so I'm just trying to keep it smooth and build some strength. But if I successfully did what I meant to and used just the soaker, this would be much more cohesive and actually look and resemble a dough. This still worked in the end, but it was not my strongest batch. I ended up giving away a lot of this. So yeah, once again, you don't add any fresh rye flour to a mix. Just use what's in the soaker, and then you can add whole wheat before autolysing, and then, you know, add your salt and bassinage, or ferment-a-lyse, add your salt and bassinage. And again, with a rye dough, you do want the levain to get a little acidic, because the rye plays really well with more acid than wheat flour does. I had to order more lids since doing this, because it was kind of a race when I was doing this. For instance, I don't have a lid for this guy, and as soon as I could empty one and do a dough dump, I would use that lid for one that had a wood piece on it. I also do need to upgrade the plywood. That is just shitty plywood. All those little gaps and pores have kind of been filled with dough from shaping, so it's actually a little smoother now. But I still want a thinner, smoother plywood. I just got a lot on my plate right now, so I haven't got to it, but that's one of those sooner mini upgrades that I will do and learning experiences. Also, this past week, I had 2 pizza gigs, which were about to go really well until I got slammed with rain. I lost 2 tents in 3 days. So these are sort of the things that happen that you can't really portray. I did learn the most important thing to do is just get your valuables out of the way and then rip the actual canopy off. But there are also cool tricks like the pool noodle trick of putting it between the truss to kind of lift the actual canopy so that rain doesn't pool up. It falls off the edges. That's something I will definitely do in the future. So, as you can see, folding does take some time. This looks like cinnamon raisin. I believe at this time I was doing 75% hydration for my inclusions, and that is totally unnecessary. I'm just doing 80 like I do for my normal country. Because honestly, I did less hydration, and they've kind of consistently ended up stiffer. Primarily the cinnamon raisin and the coffee or chocolate espresso. Because the espresso takes some water and the cinnamon takes some water, so if anything, I should add more. And what I really do is mix the cinnamon with water, and I mix the espresso with water.
Do the same old thing that we were doing.
I always add the water, Bassinage liquid, in 4 parts. The first part with the salt, and then 3 parts after that. For the first 2 parts, I've been doing 2.5 minutes on speed 1, 2.5 minutes
Start
on
getting
speed
this
2.
butter ready.
And then
It's nice and soft.
the last 2 parts, I would do 5 minutes speed 1 and 5 minutes speed 2. And that would actually get me closer in the end to what
You shouldn't even have to break this up. This is very soft.
I also was using 10% butter at this point, and now I'm using 5% butter. So yeah, so I think I did 7.5 kilos, something around that, to get 23 loaves. loaves and inclusions.
Once I don't see any more of the loose liquid, I can go to speed 2.
For country and inclusion loaves, I'll do batches of like multiples of 12 because that's what I can fit in the oven at a time. Ciabatta I can fit in 16, and so forth. It kind of helps with baked in because each batch is about 1 hour to go through. So if I'm doing 4 batches of country and inclusion, that's already 4 hours. And that's between cooking it and reheating the oven.
Do 10 minutes speed 2.
So yeah, once all the last water doesn't have like a pool and I'm about to go speed 2 for the rest of it, I'll add the butter in, I'll add the dry, and it really does help just incorporate everything really fast. And then I'll just go to the last run of speed 2 and kind of finish it up.
See, this is very soft.
Probably would be good with like brown butter or something like that. And if you notice, I do try to pop big bubbles because basically what happens is those bubbles fill up with, what would be toxins for the yeast and bacteria. So small bubbles I ignore, but big bubbles I do get rid of. This did get some stretch to it on the second fold, but it's still, you can see, breaking apart a little bit. But yeah, rye does not behave like the rest of your wheat doughs will. Like I would probably, if I was going based on comfort, I would probably rather do 100% whole wheat before I do 50% rye, 50% whole wheat. I didn't want to add any white flour. I did want it to be a whole grain loaf, and it did come out really good, especially when done right. And I do recommend weighing every bus tub, because it does help. It does help like ensure that your recipe's right, because you should have a like total dough weight if you add up all the gram weights of everything you have, and it should come out to be the same. and the udane tends to make a little more of a mess than anything else, and that's partially because of the butter. I can mix it really long and it'll make less of a mess, but comparatively, it doesn't make more of a mess in the mixer than anything else. And it is also an enriched dough, so I do make sure to clean and sanitize the mixer after the udane is done. I don't do another unenriched dough after I mix the udane without cleaning the bowl properly, you know. Here it is. I'm still learning, honestly. When it comes to cleaning this spiral mixer. Yeah, so here I'm just adding some more kind of strength to the dough. And it's really amazing how much this actually helps, like, compared to mixing for this amount of time, doing a real, like, just coil fold after the mixer is done. It does help. And I also give the dough about 10 minutes to relax before pulling it out of the mixer, so it does get some kind of rest. And you kind of start to get that, you know, shell on the outside and the top of the top thing going on. So yeah, don't disregard those mixes that are meant for the end of the dough. Situation. Go. Mixing for the night, so it's a pretty glorious moment. As much as I love watching the mixer work, you know, it does get tiring after a while. So yeah, that was only 10% starter. That's gonna go in the fridge. I'm not sure if I did this run. I don't think I did. I think I actually waited for it to rise just the way it was, and that did take a while, and it's kind of ends out to be past my bedtime. So doing it where I throw it in the fridge to cool and pull it out overnight definitely adheres to my schedule a little better. And in the morning, like right after I turn on the oven, I can pre-shape them, and then I can shape my focaccias, and then I can final shape the udane, and by that time I'm usually pretty ready to start baking. I'll probably clean up a little bit, whatever I didn't get to at the end of mix day, so I could get some sleep. And then 2 hours have gone by, the oven's got a nice thermal mass, and I can start baking off country and inclusion and go through the rest of the day. With ciabatta, I usually shape it like I do it after country and inclusion. So right when I you know, throw in that last load. Right when I throw in that last load of country and inclusion, I will shape my ciabatta, and by the time the oven has regained its heat, I'm usually ready to bake the ciabatta.
So it feels really good, and it does feel airy.
And again, I start shaping based on the final dough temperature and percent rise. I don't really look for cues that bulk fermentation is finished, because if I went off that with a high dough temperature, it would end up being overproofed when the process is finished. So if anything, bulk fermentation may seem less than complete, but throughout you know, pre-shaping and a rest and final shaping, it's still going to be out for at least another entire hour with this much to do, that I don't want to go too far in bulk fermentation because I can't undo it. I'd rather be a little underproofed. Shaping underproofed dough is easier and faster than shaping overproof dough. And B, if come the next morning it doesn't look like anything really happened, I can always pull it out and get some floor time before baking. Worst comes to worst, my schedule, I'm a little behind on schedule, but I can always fix that problem, or I can give it floor time before going in the fridge as well. But I do want to make sure I get this shaping process done without overproofing it, and if it does feel underproofed come time to go in the fridge, I can just leave it out for another hour or less, whatever it ends up needing. And I do love this method of pre-shaping onto the boards, throwing the boards on the rack, instead of trying to do everything on the table and losing all my real estate. I can definitely get things done a little bit faster this way. One thing that I do is I might divide like 12 at a time.
Go. Now we got the next bus tub.
Yeah, I might do 12 at a time. So I can also ensure I got my weights right, because the scale I use has like a 20 gram increment. So let's say they're all supposed to be 840 and I come out less at 780. Well, I can take, 10 grams off of each one and make that last one a proper load. Where if I do what I'm doing here and just immediately pre-shape, I'm losing that opportunity. And here I did, I believe, pre-shape 24 of these, or maybe more. I might have done the whole, 96 of them. Or 84, whatever it ended up being. And if I do like way too many, if I do 48 in a row, for instance, like I might get a dry shell on the outside that makes final shaping hard, so I limit myself now to pre-shaping 24 and then final shaping them so I don't get the shell. But another workaround with that would be to like either spritz or rub some water on the top, just to help them stay, a little moist through that time. But yeah, it's all about finding balance, knowing your speed. Pre-shaping with the dough knife or bench knife like this is just way easier than trying to actually pick it up. And again, it's not like I'm making pizza, so I don't need it to be 1,000% perfect. Pizza dough I usually do like to, especially things that will ferment for a long time that are high hydration, I do try to make it tight so they don't just like get weak and flatten out like pancakes. Which part of that comes from the mixing process too. If your dough, is mixed well when you're done bulk fermenting or with your bulk rest, whatever you want to call it or do, it'll end up good. So now I think I'm getting into inclusions. I definitely have done some batches without the oil and water spray, and there's not really a crazy difference. So I'm still like trying to, play with that a little bit. I just learned that my freaking spray bottle had another setting, so I could do more of a mist. Then I don't have to spray and rub it in anymore. I can just spray it lightly, and it does good.
Go for like 900 on these.
Blueberry lemon, nice hit. Also, all these bus tubs. So I do pre-shape 24 at a time, but every bus tub nowadays I actually fully clean and sanitize right away. It just does make my life easier. It's like it's easy to dread certain things when you're doing such a high amount like this, that if you have, 8 bus tubs in a row that you don't have a full-size 3-compartment sink for, and you're cleaning and sanitizing them, it can be like just a lot to deal with and a lot you don't want to even get started on. And putting anything off is just torturing myself. So now I do just completely clean each bus tub as I go, and that's more reason for me to not pre-shape as many, because that's more time that it could be to get that shell. So, and 24 is fine. I usually do 48, so I really don't mind pre-shaping 24, final shaping 24, and going from there. Because realistically, the only things that I change are replacing the scale with bench flour and the water too. I also usually put the masa dough on the wood table instead of here on the metal. I don't have to turn around as much, and it's all just a little bit faster. And I'll keep all the bus tubs that I have folds for on this metal table now. That's what I do. Because it's easy to clear the workbench, and you do my folds there and things like that. But yeah, a lot of little things have changed. And I'm getting better as I go. Yeah, it's definitely the espresso chocolate and the cinnamon raisin that like to stick to the bus tubs more than the rest. For instance, like usually like a normal country, when I spray it, immediately it all comes off, but some of this is somewhat stuck, so there's some scrubbing that has to be done. Yeah, this time I kind of shot myself in the foot, because what I was doing was just spraying and getting the bulk off of it, still having to sanitize every single one of them afterwards. So, I mean, this somewhat helped, but I would recommend just fully cleaning whatever you have as you go if you're going to do this kind of thing. Like, some of these days have been very long, 12, 16, 18-hour days. And the last thing you want to do is just have an army of stuff to clean up that really could have been done in the middle of it all. So this is a good example of kind of what I've been doing, except instead of doing 4 at a time, I would just do 12 at a time. And this will help me. Let's say I thought it was 900 grams a piece for the inclusions, and it come out to be 920. Well, I can add 20 to each one real easy before I pre-shape them. It's a little harder after you pre-shape. Oh, I got my little personal roll off to the side there. I mix a little bit of each inclusion. It actually was really good. It was cinnamon raisin, blueberry lemon, and espresso chocolate all together. Just kind of for shits and giggles. And not gonna lie, it did taste actually really good. Oh yeah, this is where I started battling for my own supplies. I have some of the wood blocks, you know, using as lids, and I need them to pre-shape, so I think I did as many as I could before I really ran out. This looks like espresso chocolate, and it definitely made a mess again. Yeah, not right now, but it's probably down the line. I'm going to get the flat bottom bus tubs. I didn't realize how much these ridges can kind of be annoying. They're not that bad, and they're definitely usable. But I will, sooner or later, definitely get the flat bottom ones. Also, when I divide, I am making sure to keep the top on top. Like if you see I have any little loose pieces that I add, I put them underneath the dough so that that top is still the top. So yeah, I'm working on, guess this will make 60 after this is done, because that speed rack to the left of me has 48. This bus tub will make 60, and then the rye will make actually 72. So, and I've done 96 before. That was definitely a lot.
Alright. And here comes the fun part.
So yeah, if your dough is really sticky, more flour is good. If your dough isn't, less flour is good. And this is basically the idea. Is first I get this bottom side and fold it over. Do that, and this is the idea that once you get done stitching here, your loaf should have like its max tension to just roll over like that. I don't like roll it up like some people do.
I meant to make a new clip, but here we go. Definitely got way better at this part of it.
Having a strong dough helps it kind of stay upward and upright.
Which is arguably the funnest part. Everything's fun though. Gotta love it.
This does remind me of like pizza making, kind of, you know, a nice repetitive movement. It is almost mesmerizing. But I am working on like honing my bread making skills, so every loaf I get a feel, and then I see how they bake and how they rise, and I really do think about how I can shape them next time. And for instance, one thing I've been working on is that first, fold from the bottom forward. I'm just making sure every single fold has the max amount of tension that I can give it. Also here I'm using a mix of bread flour and rice flour, and I definitely moved more towards just rice flour. I honestly fell in love with rice flour. For pizza making, I think it's better than cornmeal or semolina. I wish I knew that way earlier, because I did have a gig I made a little short where I didn't have any semolina or cornmeal really on hand. Did have a 50-pound bag of cornmeal I didn't feel like opening at the time, and just brought rice flour, and it really was like the best thing. I didn't even bring a backup plan in case it was bad, and lucked out completely. But yeah, that first fold I did definitely needed more tension, and I started to learn that throughout time. This is the tartine method of shaping. So if you ever read the book Tartine by Chad Robertson, this is kind of how he shapes bread, and a lot of sourdough bakers do it this way. And I do prefer this over fold over 2/3, fold over 2/3, and then roll up. I do that with the sandwich bread because it's going to be in a loaf pan anyway. And that's just, you know, that's how I do it. I do that with the rye as well. Because rye doesn't have the same kind of glutinous properties. But yeah, even since this video, I've definitely gotten way better. And it's really just about kind of feeling where you need to build that tension, and feeling where the tension has already been built in the pre-shaped dough, and, you know, every step up into that point, like throughout your folds, throughout the mixing process, throughout bulk fermentation. You just want it to be more upright. And it comes from building a stronger dough, you know. And I'm putting them in here, you know, 12 at a time, because if I was going to put 60 in at once, the whole temperature would drop like crazy. Again, flour each one. It is easy to like overstretch it and break the gluten. You don't want to do that.
I don't want to break the gluten again, so I'm going to be a little extra careful. Remember, it's good to be as tense as you can without ripping it. And it's an art to finding that happy medium.
And what I just said applies to any part of the dough making process, whether it be mixing, stretching pizza dough. You always want to find that real point of resistance and stretch to that point. You don't want to be weaker than that, because then you're just making a weaker dough, bread loaf, pizza. And you don't want to be stronger. You don't want to rip it and break that nice gluten shell you formed on the outside. There's kind of two types of...
This is exactly how I like my bread, just before overproofing.
There's two forms of gluten in any dough, really. There's the like shield of gluten or shell on the outside, which is going to be very strong, and then you're going to have kind of your mesh or web on the inside. That's why you always want to keep the top on top, so you can keep building that shield or shell on the outside. And the webbing or mesh happens more through fermentation from those gases in the little pockets of your dough. again, by the time you're done stitching here, your loaf should really have as much tension as it needs. That last fold over is kind of just, its real main purpose is to help it relax in the opposite direction. Like you might see a lot of people when they do their coil folds or stretching folds, they fold all in one direction and then turn the dough 90 degrees so that it can relax the other way and keep its, shape. And that's what this does. Instead of it going outwards after I stitch it, it gets folded over so it relaxes the opposite direction. So the best way I can put it is once you're done with that stitching process, your dough should be done. Yeah, that side closest to me that I fold first, I need to add more tension there is one thing I've been learning. Excuse my grunting. I'll probably try to edit it out, can't guarantee it, but it was definitely getting late at this point. Probably 11 p.m. and I started at 6 or 7 in the morning. So yeah, still haven't even got to the inclusions yet. Nowadays, my load has gotten smaller. Like I said, I usually do 24 country, and I do 24 inclusion. That's 8 of each of these types: cinnamon raisin, espresso chocolate, and blueberry lemon. I'll do the 12 focaccia, 16 ciabatta. I will do 18 of the Japanese udane, and that's what I call a day, because if I sell everything, that's about $1,000, and it probably cost me 100, maybe 200 after everything's said and done, which is pretty good. I think I'm going to start playing with having the starter fed already, so when I come in, I can come in like Friday morning and just make Levains. Or I don't know, I guess Thursday I gotta come in and do prep stuff anyway, so but yeah, I could make Levain, start doing prep, and then mix, turn it into only Friday and Saturday of full days. I'm learning. I'm giving it the extra time to do it right, and just see where I go. I think next week I will try to just leave with a fed starter that has enough to make my Levains. So I notice every time I feed my starter, it is really like strong afterwards. It always comes out pretty good. And especially if now I have like a Wednesday pizza gig every week, so come Monday, if I feed the starter for Thursday, it's not going to be ridiculously hungry. It's not getting an entire week in the fridge. And yep, I scrape off kind of the remnant. Yeah, once any of the loaves come out, I kind of just lightly scrape this off. This is with a GI metal scraper that's a little lighter than some of the metal dough knives or bench knives out there. Because the last thing I want to do is rip this. I freaking love these things. But yeah, at the bottom, I think I saw 6 rows, which means I've done 2 rounds of the bread, which is 2 hours so far. Anyway, here is the pastry. I am going 90 degrees against the lock-in. So the seam of the lock-in, I'm rolling perpendicular to that. And I'm patient with it. I'm not trying to force it because what I don't want to do is like destroy the butter and mess everything up. So I'm going careful. I'm more worried about rolling in the actual direction than putting my force downward. And I will flip the dough as much as necessary to really, make it work the way I want it to. I mean, pastry is definitely a learning process for me, and I can't tell you how much pastry has humbled me. So, if you ever see someone doing pastry on your TikTok, YouTube, Facebook, whatever, just give them a like just for the fact that they do it. Because, honestly, I haven't done pastry in at least a month, maybe 2, at the market. And I thought people would miss it and stuff. They still think my more limited spread is impressive, so I'm happy to not have to. I have learned with pastry, keeping it more uniform is definitely important. So if you saw me square everything off, there was a reason for it. And I'm doing a 4-fold, where you can see I only folded a little tiny bit over, and then I kind of meet and fold in half to where there's now 3 times 4 layers minus 3 times the dough touches. It is now at 9 layers. It's going to get another 2 more 3 folds, so 9 times 3 is 27 minus 2 times dough touches dough, 25 layers. And then the next 3-fold will be, 25 times 3 is 75 minus 2 times dough touches dough will be 73 layers again. I guess I'm watching my second load of country.
So my blade is flipped for the second load here.
I'm a little out of order on clips because this was already done previously, but
I just pulled out the croissant dough, pastry dough. Alright, make sure I'm on steam 2, I'll just do it now.
the amount of steam I use for one full load like
Good,
this,
nice scores.
would be 3 fluid ounces of water, which is around 75 to 80 milliliters of water. So if you have like a mister or something like that, if you have it at about 180 milliliters and shoot it in the oven till it's at about 100, you'll get the same amount of steam that I'm getting without paying for steam filter. However, I am thankful because I did learn a lot about how steam actually affects the baking process, and being able to see it, where when you cook in a Dutch oven, for instance, you can't see what's happening underneath it. But once again, I'm doing 10 seconds of steam, and I'm cutting the element off, so it's just the thermal mass heating it up along with the humid environment from the steam. Now that I got that in, I am now going to do that next threefold of the pastry dough. And this method worked really well, where, you know, right when a loaf comes out, I'll pull out the dough, and right when I throw the next load in, I will roll it out and fold it. So this dough was turned 90 degrees again. That's very important with pastry. You can't roll in the same direction every single time. Things will move around and get messed up. You do want to make a 90-degree rotation before continuing at all times. And this dough definitely had like some air in it, as you can see, and the roller definitely helps get rid of some of that. And again, lesson learned, lesson that I would change would be, I would cut this into portions, like quarters or thirds, because rolling out a smaller portion, this process would happen just so much faster. It would take, less than 1/4 of the time that this took, is the best way I can put that. So I always do lock-in, 4-fold, which is a book fold, offset book fold, and then I will do 2 envelope folds or letter folds, which are 3 folds. So 4-fold, 3-fold, 3-fold. And again, when you're counting layers, you don't count where dough touches dough. So if you do a 3-fold, there will be 2 points where dough touches dough. And if you do a 4-fold, there will be 3 points where dough touches dough. So it starts out at the lock-in at 3 layers, dough, butter, dough. You do a 4-fold, 3 times 4 is 12, minus 3 spots that dough touch dough, you got 9. You do another 3-fold, that's 27, minus 2 times dough touch dough, 25. Another 3-fold, 25 times 3 is 75, minus 2 times the dough touch dough, you get a 73 layer croissant. That is not the end all be all number for pastry or croissant. That is just what I do. 55 layer is pretty common, which I believe is 3, 3, 3. So let's do the math. Dough, butter, dough times 3 would be 9, minus 2 is 7, times 3 is 21, minus 2 is 19, times 3 is 57, minus 2 is 55. So 3 folds would be a 55 layer croissant. That's what a lot of people look at as standard. But it's really up to you. You know, if you want to do 600 layers, do 600 layers. But by that time, your butter may weld into your dough. So It's not necessarily true that more layers is better. Also, if you're doing it by hand, you don't need to torture yourself like that. If you have a sheeter, you have more options. But I think the French standard is actually 55 layers, and I do 73, but I don't go any higher than that. I just don't know why the French would even have an offset book fold if they didn't intend to do more than 55 layers. But yeah, knowing your fold types. So the 4-fold I did was an offset book fold, where you fold just a little bit, like an eighth back over. You fold the other side to that fold, and then you fold that in half, would be an offset book fold. A normal book fold would be folding quarters in from the side and then folding that in half. So that's another type of 4-fold, would be just a book fold. I don't even know why I prefer the offset book fold. I just saw it. I think it looks cool. I like technique. I'm a technique guy, so it's cool to learn that. So here I'm doing another 3-fold, while inclusions are most likely in the oven. So also when you're mixing the pastry dough, or the détrempe is the term for the dough part of this. So the part that's not the butter is the détrempe. When you're mixing that, you really don't want to over mix, because what will happen is this will be difficult, and this was probably somewhat over mixed as to why the rolling process does take long. Now regardless, it does require patience. Also, you might notice that my rolling pin is not curved at all. I like these straight rolling pins for croissants myself. But realistically, that's preference. I think it's just easier to be consistent this way. But yeah, once again, if I cut this into smaller portions, this would be easier. Because one thing that I don't want to happen is the temperature of the dough to rise too much. Yeah, here I'm just trying to fill in some gaps. And I did a nice 3-fold. Some people will cut the seam, or spine, I guess, if you will. That's entirely up to you. That's all preference. I'm also not a pastry chef, so there's probably quite a few things I'm wrong about in the mix of that. However, the croissants come out pretty amazing, and I'm happy. This inclusions look really nice ears, really nice rise to them. I think anybody would be very happy with these. Nice explosion coming out of them. And realistically, this definitely comes with using percentage rise well over time. For instance, percent rise based on your dough temperature is key. And again, if anybody's even watching this far, what I look for is first the final dough temperature. So let's say you use a ton of ice, your flour is cold, it's the middle of winter, your dough came out to 65 degrees Fahrenheit or less. You do actually at that point want your dough to double or more, whatever it will give. However, if your dough comes out to 80 degrees, which is not very difficult to reach that, I mean, room temperature flour and room temperature water in the winter would probably still even get you 80 degree dough. If I use room temperature flour with cold refrigerated water in the summer, I'll probably get about 80 degree dough. if you're at 80 degrees dough, you don't want anything more than a 30% rise. And this is how I look at it. So going backwards from 100 at 65 degrees Fahrenheit, you want 100% rise. At 70 degrees Fahrenheit, you want 75% rise. At 75 degrees Fahrenheit, you want 50% rise. And then at 80, you want about 25. That's how I look at it. 80 or above 25. If you're at 90 degrees, by the time you're done with your folds, just go ahead and shape it. Because things happen much more rapid at higher temperatures. And yes, your dough will come down to a very low temperature by the end of it all. But even when you throw it in the fridge, it still has to cool down, and it's still fermenting in that time. So that's where the basis of it all comes from. If you just say, oh, I want my dough to double, you're going to end up with overproof dough unless you hit the 65 degrees Fahrenheit mark or under that. So yeah, out of all the methods I've ever seen, like looking for physical cues of bulk fermentation being done, time, anything like that, the percentage rise versus final dough temperature ultimately is the end all be all best scenario. So here's the blueberry lemon coming out. I can see it right there. It always leaves a mess on these silicones, but luckily it's silicone and non-stick, so running that dough knife across it usually does a pretty good at cleaning it all up. Takes a little more effort here, but for the most part, pretty nice and clean. And yeah, so for anybody wondering, anybody that else also has a Simply Bread oven, this is what I do after each bake. I'm curious if you guys have a better method for this. I do have another set of 3 of these, so if, for instance, the best thing to do is soak them, by all means, I would soak them in between. However, this is pretty quick and pretty easy, and it does do justice to what I'm doing. So one thing I also want to always make sure I do is make sure the damper is closed on my oven. So it looks like I actually split this up after I did my 3 folds, split it into 2. I'm doing pain au chocolat and croissants on this one. And you can see this is a smaller piece of dough, and like already I've almost rolled it out to where I want it to be at. Also, if anybody has a really good use for what to do with scraps of croissant dough, I would love to know. What I think I might do in the future for pastry is freeze it once I get the scraps, and then, if I come in on a Thursday to feed my starter, I'll pull it out of the freezer, and then I'll be able to just add it to my pastry dough the next time. This is me trying to figure out a creative way to wrap this up. So yeah, like I said, sometimes it takes 2 or 3 times to roll it out the way you want it to. I usually get it somewhat close. And then the next run, I should be able to finish it up and shape it. However, I know because I just worked it, it probably wants to relax, and I want to let it relax to where I want to end up with the actual size pastry that I want. So again, look how quick this is. I just cut the dough in half, much faster does this thing roll out. And this is, you saw me pull it straight out of the fridge too. I didn't let this one kind of warm up at all. I will say, whoever's watching, if you guys do pastry, it is 1,000% worth it. Just the smell of your oven in your apartment or your house, it is really a game changer. And I recommend anyone do it. It's kind of like it was a challenge for me, especially the first few times that I did it, and it's one of those things I still learn a lot as I go. But the next big challenge for me is going to be panettone. I've never made it before, and my eyes light up just watching people do it. So I want to make some real, authentic panettone, and have that, kind of mastered before Christmas, and be kind of the panettone guy come that time of year. Panettone is something I would not mind charging $25 a loaf for, because A, the challenge of making it, B, the scarcity in Florida, especially, of actual panettone. Sfogliatelli, I do want to make too. Maybe I should just get a little pasta sheeter or something. But I would love to make sfogliatelli. I feel like I ran out of things to talk about. 4 hours of footage. And that's sped up. Everything is at least 2 times speed. It looks like I am a little out of order here. So this is where I actually cut the pastry dough in half. But maybe things are more in context now. Yeah, so if I was going to go back to this moment and do this over again, I would do the lock-in just normal, and then I would cut into probably thirds, quarters, or halves, and then do my threefold, or fourfold, threefold, threefold. So I just make it as small of a piece of dough as I could deal with, just to make it really, really easy to roll out. The less surface area compared to your roller, the easier it is. I'm not gonna lie. Even if I have to, do each step twice, 3 times, 4 times, it's still gonna be so much easier each rep. I will say to anybody who uses this kind of wrap, it's so tempting to use your arm, and I do it here and there, but the more you actually cut the wrap, the more it kind of stays where you want it to stay. Now this sieve I got here is just a little too coarse. I kind of, honestly, over time kind of stopped using it, but what I'm doing now is shaping the ciabatta, so I must have my last load of inclusions about to go in, at least, which it looks like there by the fridge. You can see it's nice, well fermented. I hope I do a cool little flip, but yeah, I do make sure the bench is well floured. I make sure the dough is well floured, and I try to get to the outsides as well. And then I give a nice little flip, and it should all dump pretty fast. There we go. Boom. And that's exactly what I want. And I do Sourdough and ciabatta. So Sourdough is just like a stretched out ciabatta. It's like the Italian baguette. But yeah, this mass of dough is just going to get cut into 16. I'm not going to weigh it. As a luck of the draw, what you get. I like having that kind of rustic artisan thing. It does feel like the old world, you know, to really just skip the scale for a change. Divide like normal. So yeah, this is basically how I would do baguettes. So out of each quarter, I should get 2 Sourdough and 2 ciabatta. But like you see here, I got 5. And that's just how it works when I'm doing the ciabatta. Looks like that other quarter is not going to play as well as this one did. And this folding over the top thing I never really needed to do. I guess my OCD just made me. And then watching it back, it hurt my OCD to watch. So yeah, that is couche cloth, which I believe is pretty similar to just canvas. So yeah, couche cloth is like the Banneton of ciabatta and baguettes, and Sourdough. And you can see I put these ridges in between. That's to help them not, you know, flatten out like we talked about earlier. Both ciabatta and Sourdough are my cheapest option at $7. I was doing baguettes for $5, but not gonna lie, the amount of work that goes into a singular baguette and money, food costs, whatever, selling it for $5 did not feel right to me. So I instead, to give a low price option, I do ciabatta and Sourdough for $7. And for being sourdough and the scarcity of my area, it's actually a great deal. I love couche cloth. One of the most satisfying things to me is putting a baguette or a ciabatta on a couche cloth and making the ridges. And ciabatta is actually not as old as some people might think. It's actually from 1982. And in 1982, I guess the Italians wanted to compete with the baguette that took the 70s by storm. and made ciabatta, which translate to slipper in Italian. And it's the Italian slipper bread, if you will. And stirato is basically the same kind of deal, but stretched out in this manner. And it comes out great because this is 90% hydration, so it's a baguette usually is about 75 max. So you get just a little more water in the dough with the similar shape. Looks like I did the same clip again. Oh, nope, I'm shaping now. Nice. So doing these croissants first. And you do want to do like an isosceles triangle like this and not a right triangle to make good croissants. A lot of people measure. With something like this, I'm more of an eyeballer. It reminds me of doing just like garlic knots. However, these croissants came out pretty small. I think I gave them like 3 for $10 or something. A lot of people did buy them and love them. Same with the pain au chocolat. All right, getting ready for a pizza gig, but continuing this very long voiceover. Let's see, I'm now towards the middle/end of Saturday, the bake day, once I finally get to shape pastry. They do take a few hours to proof. Any dough that really does have a lot of sugar in it, it does slow down the proofing process, where sugar in smaller amounts speeds it up. That's one thing I definitely noticed. Like 2% sugar is good food for the yeast. 10% sugar, it really needs some time to work. And that's both in the initial like bulk fermentation process and the proofing process in the end. And I did make these pretty small. I just figured, if they're really small, I'll give them 3 for $10 or something, and if they're nice size, I'll give them 2 for $10. They're sourdough, and as you can see, this took a ton of work, along with, butter, that not the cheap butter either, so maybe if I did more pastry, I'd be able to sell it less, but I also have done the math on, profit of each thing I make, and pastry is virtually nothing. Even if I charge, $3 or $4 for each one, it's like almost nothing. Here's a nice normal speed video of the shaping process. It does pay to be, slow and careful in the process. Next, I should be shaping the pain au chocolat, and that usually calls for chocolate batons, or like little tiny rods of chocolate. And I don't really have a great connect for that, or like molds to really make it, so I just use chocolate chips that I used for the chocolate espresso, and it definitely came out good as well. Also, in the comments, if you guys are ever really do pastry, please let me know what you think is a good move for the scraps here, because that's been a constant, battle for me. I usually don't make the best croissants out of them, and I don't have anything that really relies on the scraps, and I don't want to waste anything, so I will make like random stuff. But if you guys know something that the scraps are really good for, like what I was thinking is maybe for the next week's pastry dough, just add it in. I don't see that hurting anything. But yeah, also doing this did not come out to be the greatest. Anytime I used these scraps and had to put them together to make a croissant, they broke apart. Also, general rule of thumb, whether you're doing pastry or garlic knots, having your smaller ones in the middle is usually pretty helpful, to be honest. Yeah, I guess here are some random ideas I had. I think I was trying to make a cool fold, but didn't really think about it too much. Yeah, so as you can see, I mean, in a way, ciabatta is easier than baguettes, but then it comes to like this part of it where it's really not super easy. And that like brown on the couche cloth is from the moisture, and it goes away in about 10 minutes. But yeah, there's an art in itself just to getting the ciabatta ready to launch, and it requires in every step of the process a ton of dusting flour. You do, like when you're doing them 90-100% hydration, you do want to make sure you really toss them onto the baguette peel. And I like to flip them over, to be honest. And for these, for instance, like country loaf and inclusion, I do 20 minutes with steam and the element off. For this, I do about 7. And basically how it works is, the more mass and weight that your loaves are, the longer it's going to need steam time. So these are pretty small and hollow almost. So they definitely they probably don't even need 7 minutes all the time. Sometimes 5 minutes of steam is more than enough. And you can kind of tell when the steam served its purpose when it starts breaking open. Ciabatta is not something that you score, It's like I'm getting ready to shape the pain au chocolat. Yeah, you can see those already poofed up a lot. I also don't use as much steam as I would for the country loaves. So here's the shaping process of the pain au chocolat. I do a little pool, I press down right over, do another little pool of chocolate chips, and then I roll up the whole way. So normally it would be baton. You put a baton down, fold it over, another baton, and then roll it. So there's kind of like this S or infinity looking shape in the middle. Right now this is a chocolate croissant. Should be more cylindrical than croissant shaped. Comes out really nice. It's a great pastry. These actually came out really tasty, to be honest. I use semi-sweet chocolate chips, by the way. Same thing as what I use in my espresso chocolate loaf. I am interested in dark chocolate, but I didn't sell enough, to really splurge on the chocolate. If it was something I'm sure I'd sell out on, I would get, definitely a higher quality chocolate. But the semi-sweet does great for now, and it doesn't risk the quality of the rest of it. It still tastes like a great pastry with, it's still good chocolate, but it's just not the best 92% cacao that I could use. Cocoa. I know I pronounced that wrong. And a lot of this is repetitions. I mean, this is probably my second time maybe making pan au chocolat, so obviously I could get a lot better as time goes on. At this point, I'm hoping I did release the steam on those ciabattas. If I did, I didn't even notice it. Yeah, trying again to figure out the right pacing here. Got more scraps to work with. I mean, if I paid for the product, I do want to have something to sell, and I can always, like, heavily discount these scrap products. Some people, that's what they live for, is what was made with the last of everything. Also, you might notice some of those little black marks. That's from the bread that came out of the oven and ended up on the table. Just so you know, that's not like dirt or something weird. Pastry takes so long to, like, bulk ferment and to proof that I have been pretty much stuck doing it on bake day, which is part of the reason I got rid of it. I don't mind doing like ciabatta, for instance, but the pastry I didn't like that little black mark, so that's something I probably won't do. Or try to make it work on the stainless steel table. I also now brush the excess flour off of these when they come out. So this egg wash is mostly egg with like, and I'm using the whole egg with a splash of milk. Some people do water, but I like just a little splash of milk just to make it a little creamier. And if I was a real, pastorio or patisserie where I'm making just pastry, I would really, really try to avoid the layering side of it and more do the outside shell of the dough. But I have about 99 other things to do, so I kind of just went for it. And to be honest, you could still tell the layers were there 100%. I did see somewhere that that's kind of a myth, that you can just, egg wash the entire thing and you'll still get great results. And that's what I've really come to realize. However, if I had a pastry shop and that was like what I did all the time, I would put more effort into avoiding those layers. Yeah, so now that they're all egg washed, they're good to proof, and they basically go till they got some wobble.
Got the rye going over here. Just let the steam out, turn the heat back up, make sure the damper's open.
So this is after, 20 to 30 minutes of the steam being released. I mean, they look beautiful. I would get a little more volume when they're done the way I meant to have them done. But I did, cut these up and definitely make breakfast toast with quite a bit of this. So it wasn't anything I really could complain about too much, to be honest. I think I'm trying to figure out the logistics here. And I just decide for display. My OCD sometimes gets the best of me. For instance, this has like the resemblance of a country loaf. I was like, oh, I want it on the same speed rack as the rest of the country loaves. And somewhere along the line, I was like, screw it. It's fine. I need to cool it. That's the most important part. But, yeah, I think I gave those like half off that day just because I knew I did it wrong. And I'm new, so, and even if I wasn't, I still want my customers to get the best thing that I can give them. Like, it's not worth, getting that little bit of money to lose a long-term customer. There's a few, like, for instance, I made like a lemon focaccia that was just a little too lemony, and I gave some away, and I said, hey, look, like, let me know how it is. And like they said, hey, I loved it, but some of my friends thought it was just a little too much. And that made me realize either I got to not sell it or change it, and that's what actually helps my business in the future. So feedback is great. Anyway, here's the focaccia marinara that I do. And one big tip I would give is to let your sauce come to room temperature, or at least pretty close to it, before doing this step, because it is kind of a pain in the ass when it's freezing cold. And I now use about twice the, well, this actually is more accurate. I was using a little less. I was using one of the, consumer 800-gram cans of tomatoes, and making 12, and that's like not even 100 grams per focaccia. So now I'm doing 800 into 6 of them, so they each get, almost 120 grams of sauce each. I remember this batch though. These came out so beautiful. And one thing I learned with focaccia is that you do have water in the tomato sauce, so you don't want to add any more steam to the oven. Use that as your steam. Notice that's me with the dry oven. Not so dry when I open it. That was all steam that hit the lens. Yeah, these came out wonderful. I think there is even a clip here of me grabbing my phone and taking pictures. I was very happy with these. And they sold out really fast. I only have 12 of these pans, so it's cool having something that's got like the scarcity demand. And it helps people come to my stall a little earlier because they know when it's out, it's out. And there is also another woman who just sells focaccia, so I don't want to be that guy that like steals, I don't want to steal her business too much. Yep, here's me snapping that picture. I was very happy with these. I think I missed the footage on getting these into the oven. But here's the Japanese udane. They came out really good. I had to be super duper delicate with these when they're hot like this to get them onto the speed rack because, I mean, I could really severely dent these loaves if I wasn't careful. But yeah, these things came out amazing. This is now one of my best sellers. Like, I think it goes country loaf, and then the next is udane. Sometimes inclusion loaves beat it. Like blueberry lemon can do better than udane sometimes. It really depends on the day. And then basically after this, I just, I cook off the rest of the pastry. And then I gotta let, everything cool. This looks like this, I guess this is out of order. This is the first batch while they're in the oven. They're 600 grams a piece, and I believe these are 8x4-inch loaf pans. So here's the tomato pie. This was a pretty good little seller out of kind of scraps. Using 5 kilograms of flour to make 18 or 20, whatever it ended up. Anyway, I ended up with extra udane dough. And it looks like it's about 1 kilogram. That made me make this Sicilian size group of dough. And I dimpled it with some milk on top, threw it in there. Just kind of par baked it like I would a Sicilian, and then finished it with the rest of the tomato sauce. And I sold those $5 a slice, made me pretty happy. Yeah, these are the last 5. So this is more the launching process. The milk bread gets brushed with fresh milk and goes into the oven, and the milk gives it a gloss. It's also cooked at a very low temperature, 325 to 375. Yep, there's the par bake there. I want it to a point where it won't deflate. It did get somewhat, not super duper, but a little, stuck to some of the pan. And it was easy to get up after I did this little maneuver. It's a good trick if none of you or any of you have ever had this problem. And I think that was actually the milk that slid off and kind of stuck to the side there. But yeah, I got it out without damaging it, which isn't always the case. But luckily for the silicone mat or pat, whatever you want to call it, underneath, it made it a lot easier. And then I could go and cool that off and then come back and add a bunch of sauce. And for tomato pie, you really want a lot of sauce on there. And I didn't add garlic and stuff to this. This, I think, was just tomato and basil because the dough is kind of sweet. So I left it kind of on the sweeter side with, the California tomatoes, and made a tomato pie. And it made me really happy when customers came by and were like, oh, I'll take the tomato pie. But yeah, it was interesting. I used like a milk bread dough to make a tomato pie. And it was a pretty big hit too. It sold out. I only made this one, but people who knew what it was, big shout out to them. And tomato pie does come in like multiple forms. You know, it can be a circle, literal pizza. It could be more of a thick crust circle. It can be a thin crust square. It's really like baker's preference or the area that you're in. Some people put Parmesan on it. Some people put mozzarella underneath. But most don't have any cheese. And it is a beautiful thing. Like, if you can make dough and tomato sauce, like, fantastic. You're pretty good at what you're doing for the most part. So this has been completely, you know, relatively cooled for at least, you know, 10-15 minutes. And then these go back in, and those guys look like they're pretty much done. Those udanes, I don't like them getting too dark. I sell it as kind of my lighter, softer sandwich bread. Yeah, working in this baker is definitely moving things in and out of my way. Yeah, that's like the color I go for. I don't want to see any black on them, but I want them nice and tan like that. And then I'm turning the oven up to, I believe, yeah, just get that to kind of finish off. And for the pastry. But pastry is good at a lower temperature too, like 375. You know, there's a huge part of me that hates going that low in an oven, but and I am talking Fahrenheit when I shoot out numbers without, you know, a follow-up. But enriched doughs, pastry definitely needs that much time. Yeah, it really wasn't easy doing this. I mean, it's hard to see on this video, but this is, I mean, think Wonder Bread, you know what I mean? Now, when it's done, it's not quite as soft as that, but I don't have 37 ingredients. Sourdough usually is a little crustier, period. But out of everything that I did, it was, you know, very good. Try to make sure I get a nice even cook on this pastry. And I am trying to go a little on the dark side with the pastry, just to show more of that artesian look going on. And I mean, I was also kind of seeing how the deck oven does versus the convection oven. And it was kind of a toss-up on the verdict there. I think I actually like the deck better, but they were definitely way different, which I think anybody could kind of suspect that, but it was to an extent I wasn't ready for, basically. And it looks like this is the last batch of pastry going in, which is a pretty glorious moment, but not as glorious as till the last batch comes out of the oven. And then, I mean, the labeling process does take a while. And packaging, you know, it's definitely a couple hours at least. Making the labels is about an hour in itself. And, you know, packaging everything properly is about an hour. Probably even more than an hour in this case. But yeah, everything looks good. That tomato pie was bomb. The rye, I mean, that looks beautiful, even though, like I said, it wasn't exactly what I wanted in the end. That's exactly how I want a rye loaf to look. See, those are poofing up a little bit nice. You can see my pretty face in the reflection there. these guys go. Yeah, in the deck oven I did go, you know, on inverted sheet pans. It seemed like convection kind of cooked each croissant more evenly, but the deck oven cooked all of the croissants more evenly, if that makes sense. So like it wasn't like that ones on the outside were more cooked than the ones on the inside. It was more even there than with convection. Some more pictures of, you know, finished products. I'm no super pastry chef, but that's what I got. Pretty proud of all the finished things on the speed rack. It's one of my favorite moments of this whole process. It's like glory. Everything's done. Everything looks pretty. Nothing was destroyed and burnt. I still got some scraps and stuff cooking, so I still got some time. But yeah, that kind of concludes, you know, most of what I did. Thank you guys for watching big time. I'm still making progress. Like from the time I made this video to now, I've gotten a lot better. Time to clean.
Long time no see. Thanks for watching. Peace out.